All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome, Mayor Karen Freeman-Wilson. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Jim. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
So to kick this off, a little bit of background about the mayor. She has been in office for the better part of 2 terms, 7 years. If you had to put a sort of thumbprint on what I think the mayor has brought to her great city is the spirit of responsiveness. And she ran on that mission, and she has fulfilled on that mission over the past 7 years, creating a local government that when it sees a problem, it fixes a problem. When it hears from a citizen, it addresses what the citizen is speaking to. And we'll talk a little bit about that today and the context of sort of citizen engagement. So we first got to know the mayor when she won one of the most competitive programs that we put out into the world, the Bloomberg Philanthropies Public Art Challenge. We did it a couple years ago. Hundreds of cities applied, and the mayor came up with an incredible idea that completely captured our imagination.
Well, not me, the team. I get to take credit for it, of course.
So tell us a little bit about Gary's Art House.
Well, the Art House is just, it's our collective baby. And it's a recognition that Gary didn't have a whole lot of restaurants. We wanted to cultivate more restaurants. At the same time, we understood the value of entrepreneurism in a community. And so we wanted to cultivate that. And of course, everybody loves food. We also had a building that had been a restaurant that was not really performing well. It wasn't what it could be for the community. So we put all of those together with the idea of public art. Welcome to the team, an amazing artist, nationally, internationally renowned artist, Theaster Gates, and the collaborative that we already had going on with the University of Chicago, and we developed a winning team. And we're so excited because it has really activated not just the building, but it has activated our downtown community. And it initially there was a fear that there would be these outsiders, if you will, coming in and developing something in Gary, but the entire community owns Art House and really works. And we've had at least 20 to 25 food-related businesses to grow organically out of that Art House experience.
That is amazing. So the entire community owns an idea that didn't start in the community.
That's correct.
How do you make that happen?
Well, it really is about community engagement. We spent a long time. We had even community dinners where we talked about the idea, what it could be, what we wanted it to be, what they wanted it to be. We engaged citizens at every step of the process, from choosing the artist who would be involved, to looking at the potential artwork, to looking at the programming. I mean, citizens were involved in every step of the way.
The mayor is a member of our inaugural Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership class. There's a couple of other mayors here who also participate in that program. One of the things that you said that program has sort of affirmed for you is the value of sort of collaboration and legitimacy in public decision making. I think you're speaking to that here. Can you say a little bit more?
Well, I am a consensus builder as a rule. And, I will ask everyone their ideas, their opinions about something, particularly something that is very serious. And that's not only members of our team inside City Hall, but members of the public, members of the business community. And sometimes people get frustrated by that because it takes you a little longer.
Come on, Mayor, make up your mind.
Just make your mind up, right. But I found that to be very valuable. And then with the Bloomberg Harvard project, that was sort of validated because there is a lot of consensus building. There's a lot of discussion of, how do you develop ideas as a committee of the whole. And, there's also a feeling of being back in school on many occasions. Do
you do your homework?
Well, I try to do it as much as I can, but there have been a couple of occasions when I've forgotten, and it's like, oh, goodness, what am I going to do?
We do a virtual classroom, and you can kind of tell the mayors that have done their homework. They're sitting up, and they're raising their hands, and they're active. And then the ones who are kind of, you can tell they're listening, but they're kind of...
hiding, hoping not to get called on.
So the mayor is very active. We were joking off stage, mayors get dinged when they travel. But she's a big believer that you travel to learn. You travel to bring in resources.
Absolutely.
And she's very engaged in the community of mayors, leadership positions with the U.S. Conference, with the National League of Cities. You're a part of the Bloomberg Harvard program. Do mayors talk about resident engagement? How does this issue sort of land on the sort of collective, worry scale or opportunity scale for mayors?
Well, just over the brief time that I've been in, 7 years, although it makes me kind of a veteran, oddly enough. But just over the time that I've been in, I've seen that conversation, the profile of that conversation really raised from, sort of this sidebar to something that mayors are increasingly understanding is a necessity if we're going to govern effectively. We understand that citizens are inherently skeptical about government. And so how do you remove that skepticism? Not only tell citizens what you're doing, but make them a part of it. And we've seen that with our comprehensive city plan, which we're engaged in right now. We're allowing citizens to plan it with the guidance of the professionals, with the assistance of the professionals. But by the end of the process, it will be the citizens of Gary's comprehensive plan. And we are so excited about that. And citizens are excited about that. And they're telling people, hey, I'm involved in this process. So they will own it, and they will own, we expect the implementation.
Going back to this moving from a nice to have for many mayors to something more central and more necessary, how do you explain that? I mean, I don't think mayors just wake up one day and say, wow, citizen engagement necessary. Like, what's changed in the environment that you think is making this more urgent?
Well, I think that one thing is that mayors are seeing how their colleagues who have citizen engagement as a hallmark of their governance are becoming much more effective. They win awards. And so, everybody wants to win an award, right? But more importantly, I think that with citizens beginning to use social media to question government, to demand transparency, it has become a necessity on our part to say, yes, we want you involved. Yes, your opinion matters. And yes, we want to hear what you think and what you need from us.
Mm-hmm. Has the national conversation affected the local vibe and the way that citizens interact in your own city?
Oh, absolutely. Unfortunately, from my perspective, the national conversation makes people more hostile towards government. Mm-hmm. Because of what's happening at the national level, and not necessarily from a partisan standpoint, but just the discourse, the negativity of the discourse, the fact that that it's discourteous. We were all raised, or at least most of us, to be courteous, to treat people the way you want to be treated, to talk to them in a respectful manner. And when you see something like that happening at the national level, or when you see that it is not happening at the national level, then people are less likely to treat local government in a respectful, courteous manner. And they really think it's okay because at the national level, they see government reacting to citizens and to each other, more importantly, in a certain way.
The mayor said off stage, I've got big problems. Blight is hard, affordable housing is hard, disinvestment is hard, but changing apathy That's very hard.
It's very hard because, when you talk about blight, when you talk about the finances, you can put enough minds in the room to really look at resolving those things and setting benchmarks and making progress. But when you talk about changing people's attitudes, so much of that is not related to you or the team. It's related to the person and their willingness to look at things another way, a willingness to be open about looking at government in a different light. And so, the best thing that I have tried to do and our team has tried to do is when we say we're going to do something, we try to do it. And I have this saying when people say, well, you're not going to do that, or I don't believe this is going to happen. I say, I can't wait to prove you wrong.
That's great. So you mentioned the citywide plan. What are some of the other areas where you've really gotten excited about the way you're engaging citizens? I hope one of them that you mentioned is your expat homecoming initiative.
I am so excited about our homecoming. And so this really started because there were many instances where people who were from Gary who were excited about things that were happening in the city wanted to offer their help. In fact, we had a guy from Austin, Texas say, hey, I'm a professor in marketing and customer service. I'd like to come home and teach a customer service class at my own expense. And, I said, of course. And so he came, he did 2 classes for our folks who work in government to talk to them about customer service. We've had people volunteer in IT in a variety of ways. So I said, I think we have something here. And so we have scheduled for September 21st a homecoming, and it's connected with reunions at some of our larger schools. But that Friday, we're going to have a conference, if you will, of expatriates who want to help the city, who live in other places, who have developed expertise, who are so grateful for the foundation that was laid for them in Gary, and who want to come home and bring that expertise home and to just, have us present, this is what we're doing, this is where our gaps are, this is where we think you can be helpful. We are excited about that. I think the other thing is with local citizens. There are so many citizens who at their own expense, using their own equipment, help to eliminate blight in their neighborhoods. About 2 years ago, maybe 3 years, I started cutting grass as a way to get out in the community, to really send a message, because I would see these lawns where you had 2 neighbors, one on either side of a vacant or abandoned house, and that's one of our greatest problems. We have 6,800 vacant or abandoned houses in the city of Gary. And, the neighbors would keep their properties pristinely, but they wouldn't cut the grass in the middle. I was like, well, gee, if you cut this grass in the middle, it makes your property look better. So I said, well, maybe if I go out and cut the grass in the middle, maybe someone may keep it that way. And to a person, I never have to ask. As they see me cutting, they will come out and say, well, Mayor, if you cut it, then I'm going to maintain it that way. And, we do it all over the city. We do it, I used to do it every other week. Now I do it about once a month. I don't have as much time to do it because I really enjoy it. But the other thing it allows me to do is to really hear from citizens. And there have been citizens who have come out with their own equipment to work with me. There have also been citizens who have said, would you take a look at this in the neighborhood? Or would you think about that in the neighborhood? Or who have given ideas. And so that has been another way of engaging the community. But even in places where I've not been involved, there have been citizens who have taken responsibility for entire blocks of the community, because that really is one of our biggest challenges, along with the vacant and abandoned homes, the blight elimination, the overgrown areas. And the reality is that we had at one time 150 people who were responsible in our Department of Public Works for caring for public spaces. We now have 27 people.
Wow.
The size of the city has not changed. We still have 54 square miles. And quite frankly, the requirements have increased because you have those vacancies. But, you know, our team works hard every day, but we couldn't get it done without engaged residents.
You were telling me the great story of the mayor of Glen Ryan off
Yes,
stage.
yes.
Maybe you can share a little bit about the work you're doing to engage seniors in envisioning senior services in your city.
Well, you know, we have been so encouraged, quite frankly, by our partnership with the AARP as we look to serve the experience class.
Yes.
And the mayor of Glen Ryan is Mr. Cobb. And Mr. Cobb sent me a letter, and it was almost heartbreaking when he talked about the feeling of disrespect that came from younger residents and the fact that he was working so hard to maintain his property, to maintain the neighborhood, and they were parking on their yards, on their lawns. They were not cleaning up around their homes, and he just thought that the city ought to do more. And I said, you know, Mr. Cobb, I said, rather than have the city come out in a very heavy-handed way, because anytime the city shows up to cite folks, I said, why don't you try this first? Try talking to folks about how you all do it in Glen Ryan, because that is one of our most engaged, most responsive communities in the city. I said, tell them how you do it in Glen Ryan, that you don't park on your lawn. I said, and do it in a respectful manner. Nobody wants to hear a lecture, but do it so that they feel like they're moving not just into a house, but into a community, in a neighborhood. And in those instances where people are not as open to that, then call us in and we will sort of help you. We will undergird you there. But what it also gave rise to was my sense that Mr. Cobb wasn't the only person that was feeling this way. And so we had our first senior summit, our senior health summit. And as a result of that, one of the ideas that I'm so excited about that came out of that is one of the seniors came up to me and said, this is great, this is great. So the next thing I want to do is a citywide chair exercise demonstration where we're going to be in the Guinness Book of World Records. And I was like, okay, that sounds like a great idea. I didn't know how many people it would take. Turns out it's about 500 or 600. So for our national night out, that's going to be one of our activities, to do a senior chair exercise, which is perfect because historically the national night out has been geared towards kids.
What I love about the mayor of Glen Ryan's story is it speaks to a capacity within your government to be responsive in the way that government responds, to allow citizens to take up some space before government dives in with sort of, you know, treating I always screw up this expression, every problem's a hammer, so you need a nail or whatever, but
sure,
right?
Sure.
So making room for government and for citizen action as a first response.
Yeah, you don't need the sledgehammer of government in order to get things done.
But shifting government to be able to flex in or flex out on a case-by-case basis is really something. So maybe now we can talk a little bit about how you, as the CEO of the city, have worked to make that shift. How have you brought that sensibility or elevated that sensibility within the bureaucracy? How have you sort of created a culture, or how are you working to create that culture amongst the team?
Well, you know, I think that our team understands that I don't just want to solve the problem that's presented. I always want to look and find out why something occurred. Recently, we had a situation where one of our rape victims was concerned because the interview had not occurred very quickly. It had taken 10 days for her to be interviewed by law enforcement personnel. And so I initially asked the question to our team, and they said it was because she was a minor, the county special victims unit was not available. And I said, but that doesn't tell me why that happened. I said, I know the folks in that unit, and they are as concerned as we are about making sure that victims feel like they are being treated in a manner and that they're not victimized over and over again. I said, so let's walk through this process and find out why this happened. And so, you know, they know that I'm always going to ask that extra question or those extra questions. And so they ask them before I do, so that they can now say, you know, this is why certain things are going on. This is why this is not being effective. This is, you know, what the challenges are as it relates to whatever citizen service. Our 311 system is an example, and LaShawn Brooks, who handles that, is here and an integral part of our team. And she said, you know, this isn't working because there's a bottleneck. And so how do we address that bottleneck? So we stepped back and looked at what do we need to do to address this bottleneck so that we can serve citizens better. It's all about service at the end of the day. That's why we're cities of service.
Great. So when you look at 7 years in office and driving an agenda around customer service and responsiveness, and when you think about sort of the gains you've made on the citizen engagement front, where do you think are sort of where do you want to go next? How do you sort of take the practice of citizen engagement and push it further into the DNA of your organization?
I think that really is the next step, to make it a given. And I think now that, you know, there used to be a time when I would email or call citizens back and they'd say, oh, you called me back. And I'm like, well, isn't that what I'm supposed to do? So now people expect to be called back. And so it shouldn't just be me now. It should be everyone who works in government. And I think, you know, people are busy. Our team does more with less. And so it's a matter of helping people to develop those tools to get back to folks in a way that people feel like we're all responsive, not just the mayor, not just department heads, but everyone who works in government is responsive to citizens. I think that's our next step.
Great. In a moment, we're going to take any questions that you might have. So if you've got a question, get it ready, and we'll use the microphones that'll be moving around the room. One of the things I hear from mayors a lot is that you know, bureaucracies develop patterns, and you know, those patterns have been with us for a long period of time. So, you know, when you think about sort of deepening that culture of citizen engagement, and you look at the patterns of your bureaucracy, how do you shake it in?
You really do have to dissect things. And I did that this morning. There was something that got hung up and is still hung up in our system. And I said, okay, I want everybody on the phone. And you know, you can do that in a smaller city, right? It's hard for Mayor de Blasio or some of the other mayors, Mayor Garcetti, to say, okay, I want everybody on the phone. That may be 100 people. But I can say, I want everybody involved in this process on the phone, and we're going to walk through how this got hung up. And more importantly, how to use it as a learning experience, a teachable moment, so that it won't happen not just in this department, but in other departments again. And I, you know, it's not just me, because obviously I can't be on every phone call, but it's department heads, it's managers who have to understand that in order to be very effective, we have to be willing to stop and look, you know, peel the onion back to determine, why is this happening? How can I prevent it from happening? And what are the next steps?
Awesome. Great. So with that, Why don't we take a look and see? I see a question right here in the front. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mary Bogle with the Urban Institute.
Yes.
I recently did a study on social connectedness in the Love Your Block program with Cities of Service, working with Maurizio Garcia.
Great.
And I became fascinated. We did these things called sociograms in the study, where we looked at the groups in Love Your Block, the citizen groups, and who were the leaders and who were the other members of the community, and how they connected to city officials and how they connected to nonprofits, and we sort of color-coded the whole thing. And the part that I became fascinated with, and we may do some more looking at in the future, is that interface between the leaders on the citizen level, the neighborhood level, and the city officials. Sort of that, there's like a membrane in there.
Sure there is.
And you just, Mayor, just spoke to the membrane that's on the bureaucracy side. But I became very fascinated with the membrane that's on the neighbor side, because one of the phenomena we saw was that people churn in and out. They get burnt out. There's somebody waiting in the wings. In one case, it was somebody who was a night nurse. She was going to be the person to step up, but night nurses are tired. And so there was sort of we started to think about and look at very briefly in the context of that study, and want to look at more, is leadership development. How do you think about when, and even with the technology, I was thinking, boy, you can get the technology going and you get the citizens to go one time to something and give their feedback, but how do you think of developing that leadership that replenishes itself from the neighborhood level or, even the zip code level, that can keep the cycle going? So that you don't have to keep cutting the grass,
Sure.
right?
Sure. That's an excellent idea. And when I think about those individuals that you refer to who have sort of developed in the neighborhoods as leaders, I think it's, to a person, it's because they've been willing to speak up. And so I think one of the ways that you cultivate that type of leadership is make it easier for people to speak up. I give my cell number out regularly. People know that I will answer tweets, that I will answer text messages. And so then that causes people to develop. I also encourage the development of block clubs so that those leaders in those organizations, generally a block club won't just only have a president, but they'll have a president and a vice president and a secretary. And so they share the neighborhood leadership so that if the president gets burned out, then the vice president will step up. If the vice president gets burned out, then the secretary will step up. And so there has to be, whether it's block clubs, whether there are neighborhood watches, whether it's a garden club. We've had an organically growing gardens or community gardens movement in the city, urban farms. So all of those things really do encourage neighborhood leadership, neighborhood cultivation, but it's also having someone in that group or some people in that group who are willing to speak up and engage. And the first time it's successful, then that encourages other people.
Oh, that's awesome. Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm from Detroit, and I feel a great affinity for you.
Yes.
And I think similarly with the issues of abandonment, that real lack of trust between and connection between local government and its neighborhoods, its citizens. I'm interested in knowing what your thinking is about the census. So right now we're trying to do our LUCA, our local
Yes.
update, and as we speak, we got volunteers out there trying to identify those addresses that don't quite exist, but they do. Mm-hmm. But I'm more concerned about we had the lowest response in 2010 of any urban city in the country, and there's so much at stake for cities like ours in the census. So I'm interested in if you've begun thinking about an engagement strategy around the census. I know San Jose has done some great things, which we've learned from, but just wanted to know what your thinking is around that.
We had a similar experience, and you're right. Detroit and Gary are cousins. And in fact, we got our local data survey that allowed us to quantify how many vacant and abandoned buildings that we had from Detroit. It was built from Detroit. They let us use it. We were able to quantify that the number was 7,000 when we were told it was 12,000 or 20,000. And I'm like, I can't solve a problem I can't quantify. But as it relates to the census, I think that there has to be almost this street team that goes out not to count folks, but to explain to people that being counted is not going to endanger you from a standpoint of, we're not going to find out you owe child support, or we're not going to find out you owe a warrant, or these are the measures that we will take not to jeopardize you, but to help us help you. And I think that the only folks who can do that, I can't do that. You can't do that, Jim. I mean, I was a criminal lawyer for a long time, but I've long since lost my street credibility. I'm the mayor now. And so it's to get people engaged in the community who understand that and who are willing to go out as volunteers and say, when this forum comes around, you need to really answer. It's important. It's important to our effort to grow our community. And we're going to have to work harder than ever because, in 2010, we had a tremendous undercount. Detroit, other cities did, without that headwind that's coming out of Washington. Now we have a headwind coming out of Washington. We're going to have to work twice as hard.
It's an incredible moment for citizen engagement, and I think it's great to hear that Detroit is leaning on volunteers. I'm hearing that from more and more communities around the country. So what a terrific talk. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and insights with us. Everyone, please give a big round of applause to the mayor.
Thank you.